Hey, good people, Davia here, and thanks for joining me on another episode of Tales from the Shaker, a Davia Williams Stevenson podcast. Um, I want to give a little disclaimer or a little warning. We are dealing with really mature content today. And though I want you to hear this podcast, if you're listening in your car and your children are around, it may not be the time. But we're touching on some very important information. I've got my guest here, Pastor Carl D. Wright, who is a hero in my book. He is sharing some personal experiences with childhood sexual abuse. And he is pulling off the cloak of shame. It has become a powerful testimony. A lot of people have been freed, and I expect that for you too. So please tune in when your environment is free, because you're going to know somebody who's had this experience, or it may be you, and this feels a little triggering, and you'll need some time to process. But you need to know that you're not alone, that there is help, and that there is power in sharing your story. So I'm going to read a little bit about Carl D. Wright. I have his book here. His book is called Touched, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the contents of this book. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
So Carl D. Wright, I love that you say husband first, is a husband, pastor, preacher, teacher, author, clarity coach, and creative consultant. He's passionate about seeing people enter into hope and healing and wholeness that's been available through Jesus. Carl is well sought after speaker, coach, and nationally and internationally, actually. He and his wife, Dr. Cassandra, live in Columbus, Ohio, where they serve in various capacities at their home church, which is now their church. He's a senior pastor of Hope City South, and he and his wife now have 2 little boys.
Yes.
And they're a lot. It's fun to watch them. Yeah. They're a handful. They're active, beautiful little boys. This is a beautiful story. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for trusting me with your story. I'm not exactly sure how to start. I want to read something from your introduction, okay, if I may. You said in your introduction, I want to bring light to the process of dealing with sexual abuse, what it can be like to seek out justice and confront your abuser. I want to encourage those who have been or are being abused to speak up and tell their story. I want to share a hope that gives strength to the feeble, a pathway to healing and deliverance to the lost, and to give a voice to those who feel they have none. That is a noble endeavor, and I believe that you are right smack in the middle of it. I really do. So I don't know how to start this conversation, to be honest with you. So since you're the pastor, you know how to start a conversation. Tell me a little bit about how you got to the place where you were willing to write your story.
Yeah, so I never intended to write a book, never intended necessarily to put all of it out there the way that it came out. I started out I was in counseling, and after I would leave sessions, I would go home and write and just write. I was encouraged by my counselor at the time just to write, not to think about it, not to just whatever is in my mind, just write it out. So I would write it out, and then I would go back and read through it. And after a while, it was just pages and pages and pages of stuff. And I was like, wow, this is wild. And I thought to myself, if this is healing for me, maybe it would be healing for someone else. And I thought to myself, I wish I had the information I have now years ago. Maybe it wouldn't have taken so long to get where I'm at today. So that's kind of how it all started, getting to write the book and start that journey of trying to be a voice for the voiceless, if you will.
I tell you, as counselors, we like to make people write. There's power in making your thoughts things, and when you see them outside of your head, you can address them. You can decide what to do, what to empower, what's a lie, what's true. So I love that us counselors like people who do their homework. It works. Yeah. It works. So there's steps to this. There's a time when you, I guess, recognize your abuse, right? One of the things that happens, in especially with childhood sexual abuse, is it's often a trusted person, as was in your case. There's secrets to keep. there's, we were talking a little bit about all the layers
Yeah.
that a child has to process that is too much for a child. And even the fact that over time, especially if you have a long time abuse as you experienced, your body responds.
Yeah.
And so not only do you have a person you trust, a secret, a kid with a secret with an adult, like that's kind of cool, but kind of, you know, even a shady, important secret, at some point there becomes threats, right, on your well-being or on the family or on whomever. And then there's also the layer of your body will respond to stimulation, and now you're really complicit. It's a lot to get through. And is there a moment or a season? Can you tell me how the light bulb started to come on for you and how old you were?
Yeah. So like to know that it was abuse.
Yeah.
So I actually I knew it was wrong at, a younger age when I was in my teens. I kind of like clicked, like, I don't think this is right, like what's happening. But it wasn't until I was in my 20s where I realized it as abuse, as something that was not my fault. And it was just in conversation with a friend talking about what happened, where she told me, she's like, Carl, that was abuse. This was not your fault. You didn't ask for it. You were an 8-year-old. You can't entice a grown person who's supposed to have the responsibility to care for you.
You can't entice and you can't give consent.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. I heard someone say that nothing is as dismantling to the human soul such as child sexual abuse, and I really, thought that was so profound, because, like you said, there are so many layers, and so the abuse itself, that violation of relationship, violation of trust, violation of all of that, but also the secret. The feeling like I had something to do with it. Maybe I felt like I enticed him, all of these things. It's so many layers that really a child's brain is not even developed enough to comprehend the level of things that are being thrown at the mind. And so it really, in a sense, short circuits the brain, if you will. So, but there are so many layers, and so many things that I think that all aided in me not coming to the realization until I was well into adulthood.
Well, someone who is able to, or whose bent is to seduce a child, they know how to groom you.
Yeah.
And so part of that whole seduction is making you complicit.
Yeah.
And so, and removing some of their responsibility. It's the distortion.
Yeah.
And I'm intrigued, I guess is the word. Only one I can come up with right now, anyway, to hear how it went on for these years, started as a child, through your teen years, knew it was wrong, but not until that moment, like I was violated. So what came after that? Was it anger? Was it like what after that light bulb?
Yeah. I think after it clicked that it was abuse, that there was a violation, there was an anger, a disgust, an extreme level of distrust, like a realization that I was harmed, and that this person was no longer just something that was wrong, but was harmful. And so what was wild is, for me, my abuser was my mother's husband at the time, so my stepfather at the time. And the abuse lasted well after him and my mom had divorced, because he had developed such a relationship with our family and with the kids, that even when I was in college, they divorced when I was, I don't even know, probably like 9 or 10. But even when I was in college, he showed up all the way in Ohio. I'm from Delaware on the East Coast, and he showed up on my college campus. Said he was just happened to be passing through the state, wanted to stop by and check on me. But this was after I had come to the realization that I had been harmed, and the level of panic and fear that tormented my mind. So I instantly went from feeling like I had done wrong or was in a wrong situation, to feeling the weight and the weight and fear of being harmed, of being every day of my life living in fear that he would come after me or do something else to me, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Even though you're a grown
A
man
grown man.
at that time. And now that makes perfect sense because your whole self-perception is distorted.
Yeah.
And your relationship with him was just a victim and victimizer. So of course, that's what PTSD is, right? That's what the flashbacks are. You didn't have another grid to process your relationship with him other than one of fear.
And it distorted, and I think it took all of the memories that I did have, which wasn't much, because PTSD affects your ability to recall. So even the memories that I did have, all of even the good memories suddenly were tainted because I started to see, when I looked back, the grooming and the process and how things were set up in such a way that even the good now was robbed of the goodness. You know what I mean? The good memories I held suddenly were, the reality is like the blinders were taken off,
Yeah, that's a lot to get through. So fear, anger, where does it go? What do you do with it?
So for me at the time, I think a lot of I don't even want to call them negative feelings nowadays, just because of the way my brain works. But what at the time I guess would be perceived as negative feelings of anger and all of this stuff, my outlet became sex, became relations with other people, trying to find some form of peace. And then even at a later stage in my life, became drugs and alcohol. That became the outlet of just trying to really to not feel. Yeah. But it's so crazy. Is like in your mind, you're thinking, I just want to feel. But you're in reality, what you're doing is keeping yourself from being able to feel.
And numbing is numbing.
Numbing,
right? So once you're numb, you're not only not feeling the negative, you're not feeling the
anything.
positive. Numb is numb. And it's and you can't heal in that state.
Absolutely.
So that doesn't appear to be your lifestyle now.
No.
So somewhere along the way, you stopped numbing. And you made some decisions about how, like, I know that at this point in time, I read your book. His book is Touched, and it was our little secret. I shared with you as we chatted a little bit before the cameras start rolling that I was not prepared for how graphic you were in the description of some of the abuse. And I wasn't sure how I felt at first. But as I continued to process your journey, I was grateful for how that sensitized me to a little boy who didn't know he was a victim, and how many other little boys and little girls don't know they're victims. In some places around the world, it's almost cultural. Right? So I felt it was necessary for me. Now, I'm a clinician, and I don't work with young children. One of the reasons I chose not to, I just thought it was a boundary for me, that I wouldn't be able to process things like this without losing my license, harming somebody, going whatever. It was not going to be my space. I work with young children if they're part of a family system that I work with. And reading your story confirmed I made the right decision in that regard. But the other thing I love about your book, though you're graphic, you give breaks, which I didn't expect that. I didn't know there was going to be space for me to work in this book. So you go through explaining, kind of setting the stage, and then you say, what stood out to you about my story? And I will tell you, one of the things that stood out to me about your story is how over time the abuse became almost normalized. This is what we do. Knowing it's wrong, not knowing it's harmful, at that point in your life, big enough to get away physically, but we all know real prisons are here. Absolutely. Right? But as you take us through some of the experiences and him being at family gatherings and all of these other things, and like, it became a part of what was normal. We talk about, I'm sure you're familiar with the words, as you know, are familiar with PTSD, but dissociation. Right? Dissociation, we all do it sometimes. Driving down a familiar road, you look up, don't realize that you passed some landmarks because you've done it. You disconnect to the moment. And we know that that's a coping mechanism, actually, to dissociate. So you can't really take in all that's happening to you. So when you talked about how there were memories you didn't have, that was probably the protection of dissociation. But at some point, you choose presence, and you have to face those things. Some people, they flood. I don't know what your trauma, how your trauma hit you. Some people are flooded with it. Some people, it trickles. Clearly, you went through a period of time where you tried to numb those things. Can you share anything about how things started to become clear to you?
Yeah. So for me, based on my family structure, if you will, or the way my family is, the way I was brought up, and the environment I was brought up in, trauma was normal. Trauma, there's always trauma. Everyone's in trauma. Dysfunction, chaos was normal. And anything that is normalized over time becomes culture, if you will. So it was the culture of my life to exist within chaos, to exist within trauma. It's what we do. Abuse. So that the sexual abuse, yes, but abuse was a part of our normal life, if you will, not necessarily sexual in nature, but in general. So as I progressed and got to a place in life, I would start spiraling. It's like, talking about how you deal with these things. I have a saying, if what you don't deal with will deal with you eventually. So as I became an adult, I realized that the things I had been through, the abuse I had been through, was affecting my life. It was affecting my day-to-day activity, my ability to make relationships, my ability to exist in a world where I'm suddenly responsible for my own life. You know what I mean? And as I began to progress through stuff, I found myself in these cycles of behavior where I would do okay for a little while, and then I would get overwhelmed, and then I would spiral. And my spirals would always end up with me drunk or high or in relationships with people I've never met before, waking up in beds like, what in the world am I doing? And so at some point my sister had died of cancer. I had watched my sister take her last breath. And then a couple years later, my uncle died he had a brain aneurysm. And I was in the hospital with him in the room across the hall from where my sister died. And I watched him take his last breath.
Okay.
And
let me just take a deep breath. Okay. So, you just described the dysfunction of your life, the secret of abuse, the trauma that was, and then you watched your sister and your uncle die in the same space. Yeah.
And it brought up a lot. It was a very triggering situation. When my sister died, there was all of that. But when my uncle passed, I remember when he took his last breath, I looked up and across the hall and I realized, oh snap, I'm on the same floor. This is exactly where it all happened. And it thrusted my mind into this very dark place. And I started to spiral again. But it was different because for the first time in my life, I felt myself starting to spiral. And I was very aware of what I was doing and why I was doing it. I don't know how that happened. It just kind of like clicked. And I said to myself, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to keep going through this pattern, this cycle of spiraling. I never get anywhere with it. And so I remember, now mind you, I'm a pastor at this point in my life, in ministry, been doing ministry for a while. And in certain circles, I'll say, certain Christian circles, charismatic circles, the idea of mental health or counseling is like, we just don't do that. You know what I mean? Like, Jesus is our counselor. That's all you need. And so, it wasn't working. Everything I knew to do wasn't working. I read the scriptures. It didn't work. I, prayed the prayer. It didn't work. I kept going to church, going to service, worshiping, but I was still spiraling. Like my brain was going crazy. Right. So I finally, found a counselor, called her, sat down on the couch, and she was like, so why are you here? What can I do for you? And I was like, I just want to be happy. I just want to be happy. I'm never happy. If I look back on my life, I can't remember a time where I can say I've truly been happy, and I just don't want to feel this anymore. I need help because what I'm doing is not working. And I think that was the start of uncovering all of this stuff and really beginning to work through how all of this stuff not only impacted me, but continued to impact me well into adulthood.
Your counselor, she was good.
Yeah.
She made it safe for you.
Yeah.
Because not only I always tell people when they make that first call, like you think if you decide to make an appointment with a counselor, you feel like I'm making an appointment with a counselor because my life is out of control and I can't. No, that's a power move. Do you know how much courage it takes to look up somebody and call a stranger and let them into something that you've been holding sometimes in shame or in whatever? It's a power move. And so not only that, you also had the cultural kind of religious practices that said this is not legit, but you did anyway.
Yeah.
And it was the beginning of something that was very legitimate for you. And faith was all a part of your entire journey. It wasn't like you checked Jesus for the counselor.
Absolutely.
It was all part of the entire journey. And now you're a pastor telling this story without shame. You have conquered the shame. I think of shame as like a big wet or like chainmail. Right? You can't move under it. Yeah. You can't think clearly under it. You can't, and God doesn't shame us. Right. And so we shame ourselves and let other people shame us. We put ourselves in those prisons. And to take shame off and give light to your story is, as you can see, it's incredibly powerful. It's healing not only for you. I think it opens up even additional avenues in your relationship with God. Yeah. And other people have an opportunity to follow your guide into their own healing.
Yeah, I think what I have found over the years is at some point in my journey years ago, I came to this conclusion that I'm going to tell on myself before the devil tells on me. You know what I mean? So if I do it, then I rob him of his ability, his power over me. You know what I mean? So I think for a lot of this stuff, sharing your stories, owning your narrative, there's a quote I love, and it says, "Tell your stories. If people wanted you to speak kindly of them, they should have behaved better."
Oh, yes, I saw that. It was Anne Lamott. I love Anne Lamott. Yes.
So I think, they should behave better. I think there is power in owning your story, and it really does remove that shame. It removes the ability for shame to control the outcomes. So
I'm trying to find another section in your book that I thought was, well, there are many. I'm like, I don't know how to narrow it down. You gave 7 sort of secrets that make us sick. Oh, I know the point I wanted to make. We were talking about how often those of us in the church will dismiss mental health. And when you've experienced trauma, that becomes a medical condition. Your body,
absolutely,
the memories are held in your body. The trauma has, matter of fact, many of the new studies on treating trauma are talking about treating the body now, the somatic responses to trauma. And so you wouldn't shame someone for getting high blood pressure medication. There's some things you might need to contribute to, right? Take your medication, change your diet, move your body, whatever. There's some spaces where you can contribute to the health, but there's not a shame in that. And I feel like there's a crack in removing the stigma of getting mental health care. Mental health care is health care. Like any other profession, there are good ones and bad ones. Absolutely. Right? And so you have to sometimes sort through a few to find the person that fits you. Right. But I just commend you for your courage to go upstream, go against stream, to pursue the help that you needed and to open a whole new avenue for a number of sometimes the things that we do in service to our mission for God is keeps people stuck. Because then we have to perform.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of us are carrying pains and secrets that we don't know it's safe to go to. I think that is the power of your story. One of the many powerful things. You said the secrets that make us sick,
Mm.
and you had 7 secrets that you highlighted. And so this part of the book that I'm illuminating for me, who I want to hear this, are people who are paying attention to other children.
Mm.
I understand that there will likely be some people who have had some sort of childhood sexual abuse experience and may or may not have gotten help.
Mm.
And hopefully it frees them to do that. There may be some who feel triggered,
Mm.
but there also may be some who now, through this conversation or through picking up your book or starting to do some other research, will recognize some signs in people around them.
Mm.
And that's important too. So, I mean, I hit all 7, but number 1, behavior and or performance problems at school, an unwillingness to participate in school or social activities. If your child starts to withdraw and that's unusual, or if the friends change or something, or you see more anger. We know that in children, depression and anxiety look different than it does in adults. It often looks like bad behavior.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like sadness always. It looks like defiance, opposition sometimes.
When I started telling my story and my mom read my book, she said to me, "So much makes sense now." She said, "When I look back to your childhood, so much makes sense as to why things happen." Because I was literally getting suspended every other week, always in trouble, always in the principal, always in detention, and not just at school, but even at home. The level of rebellion or like acting out, if you will. So for sure.
For sure. Number 2, anxiety-related self-destructive behaviors. We talked about all that: alcoholism, drug abuse, anxiety attacks, insomnia, addictions. Number 3, may feel anger at the abuser, at the adults who fail to protect them, at themselves for not being able to stop the abuse, the stigma, ashamed, bad, deviant, responsible for molestation, as if somehow they caused or deserved it. That's a whole book right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just that section about how you feel about yourself.
How it impacts your self-image.
So you speak so highly of your mom and your relationship with your mother. And I imagine that when you disclosed to your family, there had to be some sort of disruption. This was her husband that she brought into your life. How did the two of you navigate that? Because you called her, in your introduction, your mother is your hero. And I imagine that there are a lot of families that don't navigate that well. How did that happen?
So when I told my mom, she actually threw an email. I think I emailed her, and because I was at work, she was at work, and I said, when you get off work, give me a call. There's something I want to talk to you about. And she, for whatever reason, was like really pressed. And she was like, "No, you tell me right now." So we were going back and forth. And so I told her, and I know I'm saved. I don't know a better term for this, but
I'm all right.
They have this saying, the S hit the fan. And that's kind of how it was. Like my mom went off. And she
you can say ish now.
Yeah, the ish. It hit the fan. But so she called me, told her, everything that happened. She was shocked. She went through a plethora of emotions. And I think to this day, she feels a number of things. But she immediately called him, said, "I know what you did to my son. Call me immediately or I'll be calling the police." So she called him, or he called her. She had him come over to the house. She said, "I wanted him to tell me to my face what he did to you." And so she sat him down with his wife at the time, and my mom and her now husband, and he admitted to doing it. But what's so interesting, as me and my mom navigated that in our relationship, my mom and my brother were very much there for me through the whole process. They were overabundantly available to me. But what was so interesting is my counselor read the book after I put it out, and she was like, "I think it's interesting how you like superheroize your mom. Like you very much make sure that she's painted in such a great light, almost overcompensating." And I guess another layer to it is I didn't even realize that I did that kind of a thing. But it was interesting because for my mom, this was her husband. So she naturally has, I'm sure, feelings as a woman, but also as a mom that couldn't protect her son. She feels guilt that she didn't know, that she didn't see the signs, that she didn't do something. And my family is, if you just know how my family is, she constantly is like, if I had known, I would have killed him. And that's the thing is like, I know that. That's why you didn't know. So, but what I think is hard, something that we had to work through was that for a moment at first, I couldn't tell, this was like when it all first came out, if she was more hurt that her husband did this or that her son was harmed. You know what I mean? So it took us some time to navigate through all of those different emotions. Yeah, but I think the thing that was important is that we didn't leave the tension. My family, we stayed in it, and we worked through it. And it took years, to really work through some of that stuff. And my mom, unfortunately, I think she still holds a lot of that guilt. And I mean, she's a mom.
She's a mom.
Yeah.
And to come face to face, we all know, like my kids are grown too now. And I've done the postmortems on things I wish I'd done differently or what have you. And they're these wonderful men by the grace of God that are married and leading their families and serving the Lord. So they've done well. And by extension, we did it. They're good. But you always think of those things. And to be faced with something like that, how did I not know? I hope that when you said a couple things that I love, you stayed in the tension. There's a phrase that one of my former pastors used to say, the truth is in the tension. But oftentimes we don't stay in the tension. And that's incredible. I can see where you got the courage over time to step into this story. It's in your crazy family with all of your trauma and all the things that you have.
If I didn't learn anything else, I learned that the endurance. Comfort with conflict. You know what I mean?
There you go. I like it. I'm not going to get to all 7 of these. The half hour or so is never enough. I can't recommend this book more highly. You need some time to process it, and you've put the breaks in there, and there's a whole episode in your adulthood that we don't even get to. But in closing, I want to give you the last minute or two. What can you say to someone who's on the verge of facing the truth of their story?
I would say to you, it is imperative that you bring your truth to the light. As long as your story remains in the dark, and I'm not saying like it's important for every person to put their story in a book and publish it, or put your story on a banner and fly it across the sky, but it is imperative that you come to the truth about who you are, what you've experienced, what you've been through. And I think as you do that, like you said, writing for me was very helpful to be able to see my thoughts, figure out which ones were true, which ones were not. It allows you to take your personal power back, to own your narrative. And I think when you begin to do that, you take responsibility is one of my favorite words, because it's 2 words. It means response able. I'm able to give a response. So though you were not responsible for what happened to you, as you grow, you do become responsible for your healing. You become responsible for your future. You become responsible for how you show up in the world. And I think for any healthy adult, or anybody who desires to be a healthy adult, a healthy contributing member of society, it's imperative for you to regain that responsibility and determine how you show up in the world. If you're just going through life by default, allowing your life to be owned by what happened to you. For me, I was molested from the age of 8 to 14, and I made a determination. Today I'm 33 years old. So those, 6 years of my life, am I going to allow 6 years of my life to determine the entire rest of my future? So what happens is when you own your truth, you own your story, bring it into the light, you can begin the process of healing. You can begin the process of really discovering who you really are, right? So I have a friend who says healing is not a destination, it's a journey. Wholeness is the destination, but really you are only as healed as you know you are. So you got to get in the tension and get into the journey, because you may think you are healed to a certain level until you're put in a situation or put in a position that shows you that there's more work to do, or there's another layer here. And I think what's so beautiful is that God gives grace for every season that you're in. There's a saying, he never put more on you than you can bear, which is not true for life, right? When it comes to life sometimes is overwhelming. But the beauty of doing the work is that the Lord comes along with you and he says, are you ready? Are you ready? Do you want to do this? And if you're willing, you can be as healed as you want to be. You can be as whole as you're willing to do the work for. So wrapping up, I would say, get in the tension, allow yourself to do the work, because though it is hard, though it is difficult, though you're going to have days where you want to quit, throw in the towel, where it just feels like way too much, right? You know those feelings like where you have so much to do that you kind of short circuit because you don't know where to even. You're like, and then you end up doing nothing, right? It's kind of like that. Mm-hmm. But the encouragement is, if you keep going, I have the saying, if you don't quit, you win. And if you keep going, what you find is that you have a beautiful power that has been given to you to determine what your future is going to be. Though we don't know what tomorrow brings, we have an ability to know how we are entering into tomorrow. And I think that is the power of owning your story.
Yes. I don't have a wrap up. I can't add anything to the wisdom of that. Just bless you. And I think about your sons, to have a father that is so vulnerable and strong. Like, your boys will be able to talk about things that scare them and be able to not live under shame, because they're little sinners. Yeah. They're going to make some mistakes. They're going to do some things. And to have daddy have had the story that you have and pave that for those boys, I'm excited for their future, for your future, for your ministry, for all of this. Yeah. So what we do on Tales from the Shaker is we talk about our drink. We're not doing alcohol because you're free from that now. Just a good coffee. Just have some coffee. Our whipped cream is melted, but it was very simple. I ground some beans. I like coffee, so I like fresh coffee. So I ground some beans from a local roaster, and we put some creamer in here. I think we're doing hazelnut creamer topped with a little whipped cream and chocolate shavings to make it look fancy. Yes. And keep us up light. Oh, wait. Cheers. Cheers. Well, thank you again for joining me for this episode of Tales from the Shaker, a Davia Williams Stevenson podcast. Be blessed.